That should be. Yeah, could have been. Maybe we'll have two halves. We've got folks that want to see it posted, so we'll get it. So we're in a transition, so we're fine if it picks up from here. We're not going to make you review everything I just said to you by any stretch. They'll get what God has for them to get right there. So in this transition, why transition? Jesus has been focused for the first 8 chapters on the crowds and on the religious leaders. I mean, we've seen a lot of, he'll do something, and there's a whole lot of dialogue with these folks, right? And the disciples are there, and they clearly have been being taught as well, but there's not been a lot of attention as we look at John from Jesus to his disciples. And in all the Gospels, it kind of takes this transition about this point where he really begins to focus more on his disciples. It's like, I got 6 months left, and I'm going to be passing this baton over to you. I've solidified the fact that this crowd has rejected me. My own have turned against me. Religious leaders, the more I do to prove who I am, the angrier they get. There's nothing I can do at this point that is going to sway them. That was part of the plan. That's part of the picture. If we didn't have the religious leaders and those that had turned on Jesus, would we have gotten the cross? You and I needed the cross. And as did all the Old Testament people that had died believing in a Messiah to come. They needed the cross too. So we're going to get to the transfiguration, and they're up there, and you can almost see Elijah and Moses saying, now Jesus, we're almost there. Don't miss this. Because their eternity weighs in the balance of that cross just as much as those of us that have come after it. Jesus died for sin once for all. That it took all of time and nailed it right into that same spot on that cross. Can my head wrap around that fully? Not really, but I know that's what happened. That the sins of past, present, future all were taken care of on that cross. So as he transitions, we're going to see that his disciples are going to take a little bit more. Are the crowd still influenced by what he does? Yes. Were his disciples still being taught when it was more about them? Yes. But a transition nonetheless takes place as we dig in here. We're going to see it in verse 2 because they get mentioned. And they really haven't been mentioned like that before. So the crowds and leaders have made up their minds on Jesus, and his focus is on his disciples, preparing them for what is to come. It's going to be a heck of a lot to come in the next 6 months, is it not? Did they seem ready even the night before? Didn't seem like it, did they? They were. They had been given enough because the Spirit's going to come on their behalf. But gosh, if I'm Jesus, I'm like, really? I'm leaving this to them? And right now, they don't seem to get half of what I say, God. But there was a trust and belief. Again, he was doing what God had him do, saying what God would have him say. So let me read verses 1 to 12. The whole chapter deals with one miracle. But we're just going to kind of look at that miracle part of it on the front end, and then we'll look at the dialogue that happens after, I think, all in next week. Hopefully I can get it all done next week and not 2 weeks. Some break it up into multiple weeks. We'll try to cover it. So let me read verses 1 to 12. Remember, he had just done what? Just claimed the whole I am statement. They want to stone him. He's slipping away. So this is just him slipping away from the temple. And as he passed by, kind of getting away from them and their stones, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. We had that saying a little while back, right? I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some said, it is he. Others said, nobody's like him. He kept saying, I am the man. So they said to him, then how were your eyes opened? He answered, the man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, where is he? And he said, I do not know. We will unpack all that. But as we jump into it, disease and death have been part of fallen creation since Genesis 3. And once sin entered, disease and death have been part of life for us as humanity from way back, and it will continue through. It's part of life, and these things are part of everyday life. And miraculous healing is nearly non-existent. We go through our Old Testament, there are not that many places that we see miraculous healing. In 1 Kings, Nahum the leper was actually a pretty bad man, is healed of his leprosy. King Hezekiah, who's going to die, prays for more time and for an opportunity. He's spared of a terminal illness. Lives longer as a result. In 2 Kings is when that took place. And then in Numbers 21, we've talked here before, as they were wandering the wilderness near the promised land, those snakes came up. Poisonous asp that would strike and you'd be dead within an hour. They asked God to take them away. Instead, God told Moses to put a bronze serpent on the end of his staff. Remember, and whoever looks upon it would be healed. So we had a couple of healings, but we didn't have that many in the Old Testament. They're very rare. They just don't happen very often. There were people born blind, things happened, people died of different diseases. It was part of Old Testament life. In the New Testament, again, until Jesus comes on the scene, there just aren't very many. Elizabeth gets pregnant with John the Baptist. Miraculous deal. She hadn't been able to have a child. She's past that age. She has, and Mary has a miraculous deal, having become pregnant not from a man but from God. We have the birth of Jesus. So as we look through all of those things, then we also only have 3 Old Testament resurrections. They're very rare in entire history. 1 Kings 17, the widow's son. You remember Elijah lived with the widow. Her son dies. He goes up and prays over that child, lays on 3 times, and he's risen again. In 2 Kings 4, the Shunammite's son is healed. And then in 2 Kings 13, the man in Elijah's grave is raised from the dead. So when Jesus shows up, his ministry begins at age 30. Again, he didn't do any miracles prior to that. There are those that want to say he did things as a child. And no, he didn't. I mean, it says so when mom comes, asks him to turn water to wine. Like, my time has not come yet. Really hasn't done anything like that before. We begin to see healing after healing. John says we couldn't write all the books to hold all of it. He didn't feel the need to tell us only about 7 miraculous things he does here, and those weren't all healings. And he calmed the storm, he walked on water. Those weren't healings, those were miraculous things. We had three in his time resurrections as well. We had Matthew 12:15. Well, let me read. That just begins to open up some of the miraculous things that he did there. Let me turn over to Matthew 12. Lost my spot for a second there. Matthew 12:15. Jesus, aware of this, withdrew from there, and many followed me. He healed them all. Jesus, everywhere that he went, healed them. In many ways, disease in that whole area and region while he was alive, it stopped because he healed so many people. Again, we know there's other times he left the town that he didn't purposely wait till he got to everybody. Remember, the disciples would go try to find him and say, look, they're looking for you. Clearly there were other people that wanted to be healed. And he said, it's time for me to go to the next town, because that's what I came here for. It's time to go to the next place, the next place. Acts 2:22 says, men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, the man attested to you by God with mighty works and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know. The reason he did these miraculous things was to attest to Jesus being who he claimed to be. That he was God's son, that he was deity, that he was the Messiah. It should have been clear to anybody that lived in that region, there should have been no doubt that he clearly was who he claimed to be. He did what was not normal. I mean, people were being healed all over the place. And when he healed somebody, I mean, they got new limbs. I mean, he went from a deformed leg from birth. The man that he healed at the pool of Bethesda had been that way for 38 years, right? And he, not because of that man's faith or even any question, Jesus said, do you want to get well? So I can't get in the water in time. Jesus said, just get up, pick up your bed and walk. That started the hatred of the religious leaders on him right there. And then as we go different places, he doesn't do partial healings. He doesn't partially restore hearing. I mean, when he heals a deaf man, the deaf man can hear. He's got new ears. He's got new organs when there's issues. They've got new limbs when there's issues. I mean, they get it from the paralyzed man lowered by his friends. Gets up immediately and walks. No PT. No relearning how to do it. They just get up. Fully strengthened new legs, right? And Jesus doesn't. Now you go to watch some of these Word of Faith folks who say they heal people, and they'll even admit some of the healing stuff's an adrenaline rush thing that what looks like a healing there isn't. Like some get up and stand. They don't get up and start running around and walking out carrying stuff. They're not healed the way Jesus healed them. And you find out they really weren't healed at all. And they screen people out of those things to make sure the ones that are really sick and have real issues aren't put into it. Bad video of Kenneth Copeland. He comes up to this man in a wheelchair reaching out and he does the whole thing on the forehead. Well, he knocks the man over. Well, he's all right. It's just cut down there. They pick up. He never heals him. I mean, they don't come back to him. He's not healed. He's not changed. Jesus didn't come to somebody, put his hands on and say, "You're well," that he wasn't well. And it should have caused anybody that lived in that time, as Paul says in this sermon in Acts 2, that these were all done to attest to you that God was at work, that he was his son, that he came to do these wonders and signs to grab your hearts. These were creative work miracles, supernatural works of creation. There's no way for the world to reason these things into being. They are supernatural. Acts 42, 6 to Isaiah 42, 6 to 7 says, "I am the Lord, I have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you a covenant for the people, a light for the nations." You heard that somewhere? Jesus, the light of the world. "To open eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison of those who are in darkness." So we're going to look at one of many thousands of miracles of Jesus. And the book of John only records 7 of Jesus' miracles. This is the 6th. The last one we'll look at is Lazarus being raised from the dead. We certainly could argue there's 8, because Jesus' resurrection is pretty miraculous, but we don't have him verbally doing something there. He just gets up. But I would argue there's 8, because that one's pretty critical right there, right? But we're given Lazarus is before that. So we're on to the 6th one here. This miracle should have greatly changed all the onlookers. But instead, as we cover this chapter, we see the people of unbelief digging in ever deeper, and they just get angrier and angrier. The more he does, the angrier they get. You've dealt with people like that. And it happens. When they're closed off to spiritual things, the more you try to, the more evidence you give, the more they're ready to just fight. It's like, gosh, I don't know what else to do. And there's nothing else for us to do other than to show the evidence, because God's got to do the work in our heart. The inevitable happens. Jesus begins to abandon them, and he begins to focus on his disciples. And that's just kind of part of God's plan of how it's going to go. Ultimately, he's going to turn and care more for those he's going to leave behind to continue that fight. It's another miracle that's followed by a discussion. So we'll get to more of the discussion next week. But we're going to look at a few things as we unpack this. It's going to go from darkness to light to sight and back to darkness as we kind of go through these 12 verses. So we start with darkness in verse 1. Jesus passes by a blind man from birth. It says, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And again, I said, remember how we finished last week in verse 58? He makes the I am statement. Leaders are so infuriated they want him dead. He slips out from their midst. They've got stones in their hands, but on the way out of the temple, he sees this man and he stops. Is he concerned about his safety? No, here's a reason. Safety's out the window. He sees a man sitting at one of the temple gates begging. It's where men sit to beg, right? They sit where the crowds are going to be. You know, you've been in towns. I know intersections that are notorious. If it's at a traffic light, you're counting how many cars got through the light last time. well, dear Lord, please hurry up. Because you don't want to be the car that stops, that's got that person right there. You're just like, no eye contact, no eye contact. Oh, he's seen me. Oh, what do I do now? Do I have anything? Should I give it to him? Should I not? And in some cases, they're truly in need. Some cases, I've sat there and been back around in towns I've lived where I see the end of the day, they walk around the corner and they hop in a car nicer than mine. And they drive off. And you go, I don't know about that. Sometimes they get on a bike and think, well, they really needed that. There's war veterans and different people you feel for, and you provide food at times. And my wife used to carry around a Bible with $5 in them and a Bojangles gift card, so it was something to eat, some money, and God's Word. So you're going to take all of it if I'm going to give it to you. So you just never know who you might run into. But here we find a man that, how does Jesus know he's been blind from birth? Don't know other than Jesus knows. And they've come in and out of that temple over the years, and they've maybe passed by him many times. Would this man know whether or not they've passed by him? No, he's never seen Jesus. He doesn't know who's passing by him that day. He doesn't know anything about the people that are passing by him at that moment. He's doing what he does. He's begging, not for a sight he's never seen. Can you imagine never seen? I mean, someone who goes blind after having seen for a while, then they're heartbroken over what they're missing, and they know what they're missing. You don't know what you're missing. You don't know what you don't know. And that's this man who sits there. The other reason why it's a good place to be by the temple is because its people are coming to make alms and do good things to try to get God's favor, right? And on top of that, with a crowd there of people coming to do good, you don't have to worry much about attack. If he was somewhere else at the outskirts of the city, you'd have to worry about whatever people had given, someone would have taken. Here you got enough good people around, quote unquote good people, that are looking after him. And so here he is, and he's there. And for whatever reason, he's begging on, thinking it's just like any other day. And Jesus, who has his life threatened, stops and offers compassion, grace, healing. By the time we finish chapter 9, we're going to realize salvation has come to this man. He doesn't just get his physical sight. He's going to be born again. God's going to do a work in him and change everything about this man. The beggar can't see Jesus. He's never seen anyone, but Jesus saw the blind beggar as he passed by. Folks, this is how salvation happens. We've talked and hammered on this. This is sovereign grace showing up. God searches for us. He finds us lost in the dark, spiritually in the dark, spiritually blind. Scripture uses that reference back and forth continually, that in our sin we are blinded. We have no other hope. And we just don't really even know what the truth is. We've never seen it before. We're much like this blind man who knows nothing. And Jesus on this day stops, and in his sovereign grace shows love, shows kindness. And his sovereign will, God's sovereign will, is going to dominate this miracle. This man doesn't ask for a sight. This man's not screaming out, begging for something other than money to sustain himself. He's got no hope that he's going to see on the day that this happens. The blind man knows nothing of Jesus coming by. Jesus sees and seeks out the blind man. Why? Well, we're about to find out, but his disciples are going to ask a question first. But this man's in hopeless darkness with no chance or thought of seeing Jesus or anything else. There's 5 separate accounts of blindness, of someone being healed of blindness throughout the New Testament with Jesus. It relates to our spiritual blindness. Grace requires the initiative of Jesus. Grace requires Jesus to come take the initiative with us. Great news is that he does. In verse 2 we see light, verses 2 to 5. And the question comes in verse 2, and the disciples asked Jesus, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And this question gives us insight into their theology, because they think there's one of 2 possibilities. Either he sinned or his parents sinned. Why do they think that? Where do they get that? Why is that immediately the question they go to? If something is wrong in their thought with you, it must be a direct link to your sin, something you have done. Not sin in the world, as we see the issue of sin being caused disease everywhere in the world, in a broken, downfallen world, but they link it directly to something that you've done. You must have done something. In their system, illness comes from sin, either the sin of them or sin of their parents. One thought is this could have a medical component to it. I don't know how much you know, a major contributor to blindness, especially people born blind, comes from an issue of gonorrhea. Mom has gonorrhea, and there's not a healing thing for that. There's some silver oxide, something that's given to some, but in third world countries, there's nothing. When the baby passes through that birth canal, it can cause blindness. 90% of blindness in the world, they equate probably to being some issue like that. It's still a major issue in the world. So it could be that they're saying, could it have been the sin of the mom or the dad bringing on this disease that caused, I think probably less likely that as much as some of their theological system, but that's one theory that's out there. It was an epidemic, and it still is in third world countries. But maybe, but probably more likely it's theological that they have an issue. Because the rabbis believe the sin of the parents were visited upon the children. And where did they get that? Well, they get that by misinterpreting Exodus 20, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But that's a misinterpretation of something there. But they believe parent sins could show up in children's guilt and punishment. And they made a direct connection between someone's suffering and their sin. You remember Job's friends? All this calamity came upon Job. What do they keep saying? Well, you must have done something to bring this on. Confess your sin, Job. Confess your sin. Job's like, I haven't done anything. This isn't because of that. Job was willing to confess all sin that he knew, but he's like, this didn't come from that. And we know that Job's friends get completely blasted by God at the end because, no, this had nothing to do with that. Are there good people that go through, are there people that go through things because of no sin of their own? Yeah, there are. And are there some wretched sinners who are pretty healthy and seem to live a pretty good life? Yeah, they do. So you can't connect the two of those. Now, if you have a known sin in your life and you continue in that, could God wear you down? Yeah, he could, because he wants you to confess and be free to that. So I'm not saying it's never, but there's just not this direct correlation. We're told as believers we will suffer in this world. We will go through. We're not immune to all the illnesses and all the things of this world. So, but I'm afraid we all have a little bit of that theology where we connect the dot and we think, why me? And it's usually more so we're like, God, I don't deserve this. I've done these things for you. How dare you? I shouldn't be dealing with this. Well, the real question isn't why me. The real question most times is why not me? Because are we not all sinners? Do we not all have a mess? Yeah, we could all suffer the wrath of God if it weren't for what Jesus does for us. Well, let me try to get us down. They're questioning when they come to all of this. Reflects their theology. It's seen in Luke 13, the tower fell on people, and then there were others that faced other calamity, and to them that was a sign that you're worse than everyone else. This is what happens to bad people. And that has to get corrected. And this is where their questioning thinking comes from. The rabbis even tried to explain congenital issues linked to a person's sin, made up even sinning in the womb. And there's some bizarre thoughts there I'm not even going to take you to, but somehow you had this coming because you did something even in the womb. And I'm like, okay. But that's where the rabbis had taken a lot of their thought. In Exodus 25b, it says, if the Lord your God, I am the Lord your God, I am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. Have you heard that before? Anybody ever brought that up to you before? The idea of generational sin. But if you notice, and we look at it, it's a collective statement. Defining of sin as the leaders of a generation. So if the leaders of a town at a certain generation take the town a certain direction, if it's a wrong direction, will it not have an effect over the whole town? Sometimes for generations, because we said this morning, it's like a big ship with a small rudder. Those don't adjust quickly. those take a long time of a lot of people paying close attention and being committed to correct. So that's what this passage in Exodus is simply saying. That if your leaders abandon me and take it, it's going to have effects for generations. If we allow our current generation to run amok on our watch, then it will have effects moving out, will it not? It will. And that's all that's being said in that particular passage. Because there's another passage that comes up in Ezekiel 18, and I'm going to look at that. I meant to mark these this morning. We'll get to Ezekiel 18. Just 3 verses in that, because it corrected this thought. And Ezekiel's an important book in the prophets. It says, the word of the Lord came to me. What do you mean by repeating this proverb concerning the land of Israel? The fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. As I live, declares the Lord God, this proverb shall no more be used by you in Israel. This whole thought that because of the parents doing something that it's going to forever affect the kids. There is personal responsibility for your sin, period, exclamation, mark it. You're not held into account for dad's sin, mom's sin, brother's sin, children's sin. You're held in account for your sin. We are held in account for it, but it's ours. It's not. And Ezekiel makes this point through God that I don't want you using that proverb anymore. Enough. In Israel, this train of thought needs to stop. Stop using that. Stop using this Exodus 20 and misusing it and getting people off. So back to Jewish thought and theology. They believe generational cursing. Where did they come with that? Well, the sin of Achan. You remember when they took Jericho and the walls fell down? And they were told to, at that time, not take anything, no plunder to take from that city. There are other times God said, you may take. This time he said, I don't want you to take anything. In the next fight they went to fight in Ai, a small town, I think 38,000 soldiers of Israel died. And they got routed in a battle they should have never been routed in. And Joshua was confused by it. Well, they isolated all. It's proven that Achan has this stuff in his tent. And they find what tribe and this and that, and it's him, and they say, we want you to kill all of Achan and all of his family. And they say, see, all of his family had to pay for his sin. Well, they were all complicit in it. They all were a part of it. They all knew it was there. So they misuse that, but that's, again, a thought that within Jewish theology they want to take, that we'll take it all and we'll put it all in their head. So anyway, so we figure out the bad theology that we find from the disciples. Their question reflects bad, wrong theology. Jesus answers in verse 3, and he obliterates this whole system of thinking. So let me read verse 3 back and get us back to it. We'll start running through these verses faster here. Jesus answered, it was not this man's sin or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. He just quickly dispels it. Says, enough. That theology is wrong. It's neither this or this. It's for a whole different reason, which we're about to find out. Are there times to have theological discussions? There are, and then there's other times it's just time to get to work. Jesus just says enough of this. This is wrong. It's time to get to work. Because how does that verse finish in verse 3? It says that the works of God might be displayed in him. What is the purpose of this man being born blind? Why was he blind from birth? So that the works of God might be displayed. He's been blind for who knows how many years, all of his life, however many years to this point, solely for the opportunity for Jesus to come by and be identified as God's Son as he is. Are you okay with that? So a lot of the world's not okay with that. Like, so he had to go through all that just because God chose to do this here? Well, as we watch the man, does he seem upset about his past, or is he excited that he sees? He's excited that he sees. Certainly as he comes to saving faith in this Jesus, he's over the top. But a world, you get God's choice, God's providence, was that this man would be blind his whole life, would be at this spot when Jesus would happen to show up. Which means God was also a part of these men picking up stones, was he not? His disciples were, who he had to be with them at that moment for this time. There may be things still in your life that you question God a whole lot about, but could it be that God had it for just that time? For his purpose. We have to be okay that might be, right? No matter how hard, no matter what it may have been, as we pray for and through folks, we pray that they would see. Blind for the glory of God, let that soak in. I've said there's healthy sinners in the world, wretched people. There's sick believers in the world, and sometimes it's hard to connect the dots, but the providence of God is at work. Who can know the thoughts of God? Our thoughts aren't his thoughts, so who can know? Are you okay with God making this man blind from birth just so Jesus could demonstrate his identity, power, and glory at this moment to the world? His parents may have struggled with that. We don't know anything about his parents. We don't get any family insight into any of this. We just have this man. They may have all died. It may have been just him. The works of God must be displayed. Theological discussions can be good. Jesus shut that one down. But sooner or later, you and I got to get to work. Verse 4. He's essentially going to say it's time to go to work. What does it say in verse 4? It says, we must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. When you go back to earlier in chapter 5 and other places, it says, I must do the work of the Father. All of a sudden now, here's where that transition and changes from. He's got his disciples, and what it says, it say I or it says we? It says we must do the works. I hope we grab onto that. We're part of the we. We have work to do for God. And he says this, we must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. What does he mean? Does he mean that it's going to get dark that night? I don't think so. Although I do think he intends to heal this man in the daylight. That just seems kind of cruel, right? You're going to give this man sight at nighttime when he hasn't seen for his entire life? I do think he wants to heal him during the daylight. I think there's a part of that. That's not what he's saying, right? He's saying, I don't have much more time left. I'm going to die on this cross, which he's not gone into detail here with them on that yet, but will. And they don't have a lot of years left either, right? Don't many of them die as martyrs? And while it's daylight, means you and I have X amount of time to serve him and to do so. And I will say this, the longer I've been in ministry, the more urgency I have that I don't have that much time left compared to where I started. I don't want to waste time. I want to take part of it, you see people die that you think, gosh, I could have said more, done more. Part of it, you don't have but so much more time. As a church, we have who knows how much time. As a body and as individuals, are we serious about captivating the time to serve him, to make him known while we have? Because there will come a point where there is no more time. Jesus shows up tonight. Do our lost friends have any more time? No. Clock's done. Hourglass, don't get to turn it back over. Saying that it's empty. We don't have it to look at to know how much there is. It just is. And Jesus says, time is coming, it's time to work. Let's do the works while we're here. And I'm the light of the world, and so they begin to jump through all of that. Ephesians 5:16 essentially makes that point, making the most of your time. Stop being distracted by the world, get to work. Church, let's get to work. Verse 5, as long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. And we're going to find out that by verse 38, this man is saved. If you want to jump ahead, we'll read that just this morning, but we're going to get to it. But it says, he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. That's where this man's going to go. He mentions Jesus this first time as we jump through these questions as that man, Jesus. But by the end, he's his Lord. Well, the next section is sight, verses 6 and 7. And before I even read it, why did Jesus use this method? Here's some speculations. There's lots of them. To make use of healing qualities of saliva. Really? I find that a stretch. Sorry, just not buying that. To make him even more blind, one person said. I'm sorry, putting mud on somebody's eyes who's been blind from birth doesn't make him more blind. He can't see, he's blind. But that's one person's thought. I don't really understand where they go with that one. To symbolize that the man is made from dirt. And I've heard that in a number of places, and I just don't see the connection there. Just another said to give the eyes time to heal. They don't. When Jesus does this, they don't need time to heal. They become new. They're not just magically kind of going from a lifetime of dysfunction. He gives them new eyes. So I don't buy that one either. Silly ideas. Why does he use this method? I have no idea. What's more, I really don't care. He just did it because he did it. But can you imagine? I do believe that there is a part of him doing it that requires an act of obedience on this man's part. Because you can imagine, he could have spit, put mud on the guy's eyes, and the guy not gone to wash, and he's sitting somewhere, and someone says, "What's that all over your eyes?" Well, this guy, Jesus, spit and put mud on. He told me to go wash and I'd see, but what does he know? Could have been a choice of his, right? He didn't know Jesus. He didn't. But he does go to wash. Now here's the verses that come with it. Having said these things, he spit on the ground, made mud with his saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with mud and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Do you remember the pool of Siloam when we were back looking at the Festival of Booths? And they remembered the water God provided out in the wilderness. I said they took those golden pitchers in the morning and they would go fill up in that same pool of water and they'd come back and dump it all over the altar. It was King Hezekiah had built a tunnel. I mean, this was a kind of sacred body of water within the city that had a lot of history behind it, but it meant sent. And Jesus sent him to go wash that he would have sight. And we know that he does. Well, if you came to a blind beggar, spit, made mud, put it on his eyes, he'd probably slap you. Wonder what the heck you were doing. Why would you be doing this? But because a divine propulsion is beginning to act on this man's will, God is making him alive. By the time we finished, he's saved for eternity. God's providence is at work. Do we see that working in this man? Why would he get up and go wash? Well, God's doing something in his heart. We're going to see how God changes his heart as he has to defend what happened. Jesus goes from being a man, we're going to see that he calls him a prophet, and by the end he calls him Lord. But having to defend what happened to him causes him to fall in love with Christ all the more and to believe and understand who this man was that healed him in the first place. But that doesn't happen if we just pray a prayer and we go on our business like nothing's happened. God's providence is at work. He's being transformed. Regeneration is at work. This man's being drawn by the Spirit of God. So as I draw us to a close and all this to get us to communion, the pool of Siloam, I said, meant sent. Again, it had all kinds of significance to them. Jesus had said that if you would come drink of this water, remember that you would have life. Made that big claim there at the end of that whole section we looked at. Sovereign grace comes to dark, blind souls, and it provides cleansing water. Well, back to the dark side in these last verses. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "It is he." Others said, "No, but he's like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." And they said to him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, anointed my eyes, said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went and washed and received my sight." And they said to him, "Where is he?" Can you imagine? Where is he? You're asking me? I've been blind my whole life. I don't even know where I am. I don't know where anything is. Where is he? The corner of what and what? I don't even know. I'm seeing for the first time this temple area, and the only thing I really want to see right now is I want to see this man who healed me. The only thing I want more than anything is to be face to face with this man who put this mud on my eyes and told me to go, that gave me a hope I never even thought I could have. Hope I had long given up. And now here I am this man. I am the one. How were your eyes opened? It's a simple explanation. The man called Jesus. Much like his life being in danger, having left that temple, finding this blind man, much the same that while he's on the cross, he ends up grabbing a man to his side and taking him to eternity with him that day. People ask that man, how did you get here? What do you know about theology and this and that? Don't know anything. Just know the man on the middle cross said I could come. Right now, that's all this man, blind man, beggar, knows. This man, Jesus, told me to wash. And I would see. And now I see. Where is he? I pray that we would be quick to share the hope we have with people who don't know where he is. They don't know him. The darkness remains on all the people. Next week we'll see they take him to the experts. Who are the experts? Well, they're the religious leaders. They're going to investigate the miracle. We're going to find they continue to get angrier and angrier, and they're just lost and lost. So that's how salvation takes place. Sovereign grace comes to the spiritually dead and blind. It moves out of love and compassion. We receive it by faith, the cleansing of Jesus, who cleanses us with water, spirit, and blood. Gives us sight, gives us life. We could not see him. He saw us. All to his glory we're made new. When he tells us to deny ourselves and pick up a cross and follow, we obey, because he's made us alive. We will see this blind man will come to a deeper understanding of who Jesus is and what took place as he defends his new faith next week. But this man Jesus was what was different. I pray he's what's different in your life. I pray that you have no doubt that you were blind and couldn't see. Because of him you see and you're alive. Because of him all things have been made new. Because of him you have a hope. Because of him there are people that question, are you still this person? Because hopefully you're changing. While you look a lot like, you're not that person at all anymore. Because he's changed those things because you see now. As we call out our crowd to join us, but we're going to take communion together. I'll play a song while that goes. But as we're grabbing them, here's how J.B. Phillips described this man they called Jesus. One of the first kind of new translations that somebody had written a while ago was called the Phillips translation. But he says this: the man they called Jesus made some mud and put on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, and I went and washed and I see. Jesus is more than a man. The fact that he healed the man who had been born blind is proof of that. There are many other proofs as well. Jesus is also God. He's the Alpha and Omega, the beginning, the end. He's the King of kings and Lord of lords. He's the Ancient of Days. He is Jehovah Jireh, El Elyon, Adonai. He is the Lord of hosts. He is the Savior. Jesus is all things, and yet it is also his glory. He is a man. And this is not at all a bad place at which to begin to know him. What a man he is, this man Jesus. He is a man. I had deep respect, indeed a great reverence for the conventional Jesus Christ whom the church worshipped, but I was not at all prepared for the unconventional man revealed in the terse Gospels. No one could possibly have invented such a person. This was no puppet hero built out of imaginations of adoring admirers. This man Jesus, so briefly described, rang true, sometimes alarmingly true. I began to see now why the religious establishment of those days wanted to get rid of him at all costs. He was sudden death to pride, pomposity, and pretense. This man could be moved with compassion and could be very gentle, but I could find no trace of the gentle Jesus, meek and mild. He was quite terrifyingly tough, not in a bulldog drumming James Bond sort of way, but by the sheer strength of a unified and utterly dedicated personality. He once, at least, walked unscathed through a murderous crowd. I've known a few, very few men who could do that. But then I find that this sheer strength was still his after hours of unspeakable agony in the Garden of Gethsemane. Those who were sent to arrest him fell back to the ground. Jesus was a man of such stature and quality that he could remain in command of a situation even when the odds were heavily against him. I pray that as we read through this man, Jesus, that's why I don't like the pictures, not to mention our second commandment tells us not to have images of God. So from a biblical standpoint, but what do those pictures typically depict Jesus as? Is this effeminate European shampoo model. Yes, with blonde hair and blue eyes, and always looking somewhat effeminate, never with just the strength and the confidence and belief that I believe that he would have. I don't need to have an image of him. We're going to see him one day. And he's the light, and it's going to be so bright, and we're going to fall to our face. And got that whole song I can only imagine, right? But as we consider communion and him with them, telling them, we can turn that off at this point if we haven't already. Because once I play a song, it won't like me on Facebook.